People wearing open-toed sandals are just visible at the edges of a photograph of four freshly caught fish laid out on a dirt floor. One person points at one of the fish. Figure 15. According to the Seychelles news agency, yellowfin tuna in the Indian Ocean is the most overfished tuna in the world. Under pressure from the European Union and numerous non-governmental organizations, Indian Ocean Tuna Commission countries met in 2021 to discuss the sustainability of fishing practices. In this photo, buyers and sellers negotiate prices of different varieties of tuna at a market in Mogadishu. Credit 2013-03-16 Somalia Fishing M by AMISOM Public Information /Flickr Public Domain. Chapter Outline 15.1 The Problem of Global Governance 15.2 International Law 15.3 The United Nations and Global Intergovernmental Organizations IGOs 15.4 How do regional IGOs contribute to global governance 15.5 Non-state actors, non-governmental organizations NGOs 15.6 Non-state actors beyond NGOs. No individual or state owns the oceans and the wildlife in them. They are a shared, finite resource. Overfishing is an unsustainable global problem, especially now that technological advancements allow thousands of fish to be harvested at once. Only through the establishment of rules can the fish continue to be a source of food and income for future generations. In a system of sovereign states, managing international resources like the fish in the sea is no easy task. As discussed in earlier chapters, state sovereignty is the concept that states have an inherent right to independence and a right to formulate policies and take actions that they deem to be in their own national interests. Managing international resources requires navigating the claims sovereign countries have on those resources, understanding the needs of individuals who depend upon them for their livelihood, and thinking about the sustainability of those resources for the future. No individual state can do this alone. International law and non-state actors, especially international organizations, participate in global governance in order to address complex issues like managing global fishing or preventing conflict. Along with governments, thousands of organizations engage in collaborative problem-solving, encourage broad and transparent international communication, and assist those in need. By creating and following norms and rules and advocating for the impoverished and marginalized, international law and non-state actors shape state behavior and promote a more peaceful and prosperous international system. The importance of international law and non-state actors to the outcomes of international relations is a subject of some debate among proponents of the various theories of international relations discussed in Chapter 14. International relations, but there is little doubt that the era of globalization has enhanced their visibility and influence. Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to define global governance. Define and give examples of collective goods and the tragedy of the commons. Discuss global governance as a response to the anarchic nature of the international system. Identify the actors involved in global governance. States do not operate in isolation. They exist in a global community of sovereign states. As in all communities, each individual actor has their own motivations or goals and is impacted by the broader shared environment. Though the international system is anarchic, that is, there is no overarching international authority to help promote peace and prosperity among states, each state's efforts to achieve those goals is to some degree dependent upon the actions of other states in the system. Recognizing that the achievement of prosperity and security requires shared action, the global community sets rules and norms of behavior to give some structure to the anarchic system. This global governance is the process by which sovereign states accrue rights and duties in the international community. It provides peace and security, justice and mediation systems for conflict, functioning markets, and unified standards for trade and industry, helping states thrive even under conditions of anarchy. Like other communities, the international system is tasked with convincing individual members to take some responsibility for solving collective problems. This task is especially difficult when individual members somehow profit from behavior that exacerbates these problems. The tragedy of the Commons 3 occurs when there is a rivalry for limited resources to which it is inherently difficult to restrict access, and individual states prioritize their own short-term economic survival over broader long-term community interests. interests that are often referred to as collective goods. Individual states have incentives to take actions in order to secure these goods for their own benefit that may negatively impact others. For example, individual states may prioritize cost savings for manufacturing plants that use the cheapest energy source, even if doing so contributes to continuing damage to the common environment. China, for instance, engaged in rapid industrialization, dramatically increasing the size of its economy and the quality of life for the Chinese people. However, in the process, China became the world's leading producer of air pollution. Air pollution cannot be contained to the boundaries of the country producing the pollution, and clean air is a collective good. International issues like air pollution, where one state's actions to mitigate its role in intensifying a problem may be ineffective if its neighbor does not take similar action, illustrate the complexities of the tragedy of the commons. Video. Tragedy of the commons. The more we exploit common resources, the scarcer these resources become. The anarchic nature of the international system complicates efforts to persuade states to recognize their contribution to a common problem and to take responsibility for their actions. Collective goods benefit everyone, regardless of whether they participate in securing them, and it can be difficult to motivate individual states to make sacrifices to secure those goods if other states are already working on it, a phenomenon called free riding, which is discussed in more depth in Chapter 6. The fundamentals of group political activity. Through global governance, the international community helps states and people obtain these public goods while maintaining the principle of state sovereignty on which the international system is based. Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to define and identify sources of international law, explain how state sovereignty informs international law, differentiate between the International Court of Justice, ICJ, and the International Criminal Court, ICC. Discuss the development of key areas of international law, including the law of the sea, the Geneva Conventions, and human rights law. International law is a set of formal and informal rules that loosely govern the international system, setting parameters around the conduct of state and non-state actors. In the absence of a central global government, international law plays a critical role in increasing the predictability of international relations, helping to counteract the anarchy of the system by prescribing norms and setting expectations of behavior. It facilitates state interactions in common places such as the air and the sea, and helps promote peace and lessen the impact of conflict. International laws govern airline travel, commerce, maritime law, human rights, the development and use of weapons, and the environment, among other areas. International law is not found in a single book or document. Rather, it is the sum total of international treaties, other international agreements, and customary law, which is derived from the long-time practices of states. See Chapter 11. Courts and law. International law has developed out of functional necessity, as in the cases of international transportation, commerce, or communications, for example, or because of broad consensus around moral or immoral behavior, as in issues of human rights and the laws of war. Two courts adjudicate international law: the International Court of Justice, ICJ, which has jurisdiction over disputes between states, and the International Criminal Court, ICC, which has jurisdiction over individual criminal behavior such as war crimes or genocide. Some other international organizations, such as the European Union and the World Trade Organization, also have legal systems that adjudicate disputes between member states. How does international law establish the rights and obligations of states? The recognition of state sovereignty provides the foundation for international law. Typically, sovereign states willingly enter into agreements that they believe will benefit them in some way, with the understanding that by signing a treaty they agree to its terms, including obligations and constraints on their behavior. The United Nations, UN, a global organization bringing together nearly every state in the world to promote peace and stability, hosts a repository of more than 500 active treaties across every conceivable issue in international relations. 4 signatory states may monitor or punish states that do not fulfill their treaty obligations. In this way, all individual, sovereign parties to a treaty ensure that they are treated fairly under the terms of the agreement and that they receive the benefits they are due. Some treaties require states to modify their domestic policies. For instance, states that sign the Paris Climate Accord commit to solve a common problem, climate change, by taking certain steps in their own country. Signatory countries that fail to take those steps may be acting within their sovereign rights, but if they sign the treaty, those domestic actions or that domestic inaction are now regulated by international law. States that sign international conventions like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, commit to follow the guidelines set forth in those documents. Examples of international law. 3 particularly well-developed areas of international law are the law of the sea, the Geneva Conventions, and human rights law. They illustrate how functional needs and moral obligations have driven the development of international law and helped states acquire global goods. The United Nations convened the first conference on the law of the sea in 1958. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, was signed in 1982 and came into force in 1994. Among other things, the UNCLOS clarifies where countries' boundaries extend into the ocean, who owns the fish in the water, and who has the right to use sea traffic lanes. UNCLOS identifies state rights, freedoms, and obligations in areas such as shipping, fishing, wrecks, and cultural heritage, and the protection of the marine environment. 5. All UN member states sign the Geneva Conventions, a series of treaties and protocols that codify international humanitarian law. Through the efforts of the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, the first Geneva Convention was signed in 1864, allowing non-combatants to treat wounded soldiers in the battlefield. There are now 4 Geneva Convention treaties, the fourth of which establishes a legal definition of war crimes, all focused on protecting civilians and prisoners of war during military conflicts. Video. Former UN Ambassador Susan Rice discusses Geneva Conventions and American Red Cross curriculum. On the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Geneva Conventions, then UN Ambassador Susan Rice discussed the United States' commitment to supporting international humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions serve as the basis for a much broader body of international human rights law that includes 9 core human rights treaties that extend beyond wartime behavior. These treaties recognize the inalienable rights of people and codify crimes against humanity. They call upon all states to prevent genocide, which they define as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. 6. And to punish those who perpetrate it. All UN member states have ratified at least one of the 9 core human rights treaties, and 80% have ratified 4 or more, accepting the obligations and duties under international law to respect, protect, and promote human rights. 7. In 2001, the international community developed a principle called responsibility to protect, R2P, which justifies international intervention to protect human rights. Arising from the horror at the complacency of the international community during the Rwandan genocide and the ethnic cleansing in the former Yugoslavia during the 1990s, in 2005, world leaders at the UN World Summit unanimously agreed to adopt R2P. 8. The philosophy behind R2P is that state sovereignty carries with it the obligation of the state to protect its own people, and that if the state is unwilling or unable to do so, the responsibility shifts to the international community to use diplomatic, humanitarian, and other means to protect them. 9. R2P obliges state governments to prevent crimes against humanity, and if they do not, it specifies that the United Nations Security Council may intervene to protect at-risk populations. Video. Amal Clooney, international human rights lawyer. In this video clip, international human rights lawyer Amal Clooney delivers a statement to the UN Security Council on her work representing women who have been victims of international crimes against humanity at the hands of ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, a militant extremist group that the United Nations has designated a terrorist organization, and asks the international community to bring the perpetrators to justice. How is international law enforced? Enforcing international law requires the will and power of states. This can be a challenge for a variety of reasons, including the risk of hostile confrontation, the potential damage to valuable international relationships, and the reluctance to interfere with state sovereignty by intervening in domestic affairs. States are rarely punished for violations of international human rights law that happen within their borders. Beginning in 2017, the Myanmar government launched a campaign against the Rohingya, an ethnic minority, and in the years since, observers have accused the government of burning down villages and engaging in systematic rape and torture in violation of human rights treaties Myanmar has signed. In cases like these, in which a government violates an international law within its own borders, the international community may be unwilling or unable to enforce treaty obligations. 10. The groups suffering these human rights abuses are typically without political or military power and have little recourse if the international community is unwilling to come to their aid, even if there is broad agreement that international law is being broken. International law is the judicial branch of global governance. Within a country, judicial decisions are meaningful when, if necessary, the executive branch has the ability to enforce them. Because there is no executive branch in the global governance system, international laws are difficult to enforce. Sometimes powerful states decide to enforce international law, but this is not guaranteed and often depends upon power imbalances. Powerful states are more likely to get away with noncompliance than weak states. State interest states that are allied with powerful states may get away with noncompliance more than enemies, and the perceived ease of halting the bad behavior. Civilians and coalition military forces crowd together, holding aloft Kuwaiti, Saudi Arabian, British, and American flags. Figure 15. 2. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, invaded Kuwait, violating international law. The UN Security Council set a January 15, 1991, deadline for Iraqi withdrawal. On January 17, a UN coalition of 39 countries, led by the United States, launched Operation Desert Storm to force Iraq out of Kuwait and show intolerance for military aggression and the strengthening of international cohesion, international law, and liberal institutions, including the UN. 11. In this photo, soldiers and civilians raise American, British, Saudi, and Kuwaiti flags to celebrate following the retreat of Iraqi forces from Kuwait. Credit: American, British, Saudi, and Kuwaiti flags are held aloft by celebrating soldiers and civilians following the retreat of Iraqi forces from Kuwait as a result of Operation Desert Storm by CW02 Ed Bailey, Department of Defense. American Forces Information Service, Public Domain. The International Court of Justice, ICJ. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, also called the World Court, is headquartered in the Peace Palace in The Hague, Netherlands. The ICJ was the original judicial institution of the United Nations. A large brick building is surrounded by brick walls and iron gates. A tall clock tower rises on the left side of the building. A field of colorful flowers blooms in front of the building and gates. Figure 15. 3. The Peace Palace in The Hague is the home of the International Court of Justice. Credit: Peace Palace by Cliché Libel Burr / Wikimedia Commons, CC by 40. The ICJ was founded in 1945 to resolve disputes between states. Any UN member state can bring a case to the ICJ. The ICJ's jurisdiction is limited to interstate disputes and advisory opinions for United Nations bodies. The most common types of cases states bring before the ICJ involve boundary and resource disputes. About a third of UN member states, not including the United States, have signed a document agreeing to be bound by the ICJ's rulings. Since its founding, the ICJ has issued approximately 160 rulings, including both resolutions to interstate disputes and advisory opinions. 12. The International Criminal Court, ICC. When egregious human rights crimes are perpetuated on domestic groups and do not cross state boundaries, they are particularly challenging to punish, as the doctrine of state sovereignty protects internal affairs. Following the 1994 Rwandan genocide and ethnic cleansing in the former Yugoslavia in the early 1990s, the UN established international criminal tribunals to help bring the perpetrators to justice and to end impunity, or the lack of punishment, for criminal behavior. Given the costs and logistics associated with these temporary and issue-specific courts, in 1998 the United Nations Rome Statute established the International Criminal Court, ICC, as a permanent court to oversee such cases. The ICC was designed to address problems outside the scope of the ICJ, particularly to bring to justice individuals accused of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. In 2018, the ICC's jurisdiction was expanded to cover the crime of aggression. Thus far, the ICC has heard 30 cases and is investigating multiple others. 13. Over 120 states are party to the Rome Statute, but powerful states with global reach like Russia, China, and the United States have been reluctant to recognize the legitimacy of the ICC, fearing it will infringe on state sovereignty and be used as a political weapon against soldiers or other nationals abroad. The United States has established a network of bilateral treaties with countries around the world promising not to prosecute any U.S. citizen through the ICC. 14. How does international law contribute to global governance? As doctoral researcher Heath Pickering notes, agreements to norms and treaties have increased international institutions, given rise to non-state actors, and rapidly developed the contemporary customary and treaty-based rule system. 15. Given the relative lack of enforcement mechanisms, state compliance with international law is surprisingly high. Most states comply with their obligations most of the time, and state leaders typically couch their actions in the language of international law, feeling compelled to justify their behavior according to accepted norms. The more states comply and feel the need to explain their behavior in common terms accepted by the international community, the more predictable international relations will be. Multiple actors take part in global governance. States themselves, both as individual actors and through their participation in organizations with other states, are the primary actors. Non-governmental organizations, multinational corporations, national groups, and religious actors also contribute to global governance. International cooperation among these various actors is needed to reach agreement, to develop international law that sets limits on who can do what and establishes punishments for exceeding those limits. Disruptive groups that pose a threat to the common peace and prosperity can only be countered through global governance. Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to define intergovernmental organizations and discuss their role in global governance. Discuss the purpose and history of the United Nations. Describe the structure of the United Nations. Explain the role of peacekeepers. Analyze the sources and limits of the power of the United Nations. Intergovernmental organizations, IGOs, are groups made up of member states that are held together by formal agreement. The number of intergovernmental organizations has increased dramatically since World War II. IGOs help the international community focus on issues and coordinate actions even when individual states' interests may push them to act in ways that are incompatible with common goals. Each member state's government selects delegates to represent its interests at IGO meetings. There are dozens of IGOs. This section focuses on global IGOs, that is, IGOs whose membership is open to states around the world. The scope of global IGO activity varies widely, from technical organizations such as the International Civil Aviation Organization and the International Hydrographic Organization to organizations with a specific, narrow focus, such as the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission. While some global IGOs have a relatively small number of members, 193 out of 195 recognized sovereign countries in the world are members of the largest global IGO, the United Nations. 16 and 164 are members of the World Trade Organization. 17. With its worldwide reach, the United Nations contributes to global governance more than any other IGO. Since its beginning in 1945, its membership has grown as the number of sovereign states has increased. The newest members are Montenegro and South Sudan. The Holy See and Palestine are non-voting observer members. 18. The UN addresses every conceivable issue in international relations, from peace and security to migration and refugees, law, food, development, energy, and human rights, among others. Dozens of smaller global IGOs are housed within the UN framework. Where can I engage? Video. Virtual tour of the UN. If you can't visit the UN in person, this video can take you on a virtual tour of the UN headquarters in New York. Headquartered in New York City, the UN is a hub of international activity, with representatives from member countries participating in General Assembly and committee meetings and engaging in forums on issues of international concern. You can visit the UN, where tours are conducted in multiple languages. The founding and mission of the UN. The United Nations was created after World War II to ensure international peace and stability. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, established a global IGO called the League of Nations. The purpose of the League was to facilitate good relations among countries of the world and to punish aggression. To deter aggression, the League used the principle of collective security, requiring member states to jointly retaliate against any aggressive action of another state. Because the United States Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, the United States did not join the League of Nations. Ultimately, the League was ineffective in punishing aggressive states, and expansionist powers Japan, Germany, and Italy all withdrew from the League prior to World War II. While some might view the outbreak of World War II less than 20 years after the conclusion of the First World War as a failure of the idea behind the League, the leaders of the WWII allied states saw the outbreak as evidence of the need for an even stronger global organization, and in response they created the United Nations. United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt committed U.S. membership and backing, and the U.S. Congress agreed to join the United Nations. While the League had required unanimous agreement among its members to take action, the UN requires only a majority vote for most resolutions. A two-thirds majority was required for issues of peace and security, admission of new members, and budgetary matters. Initially, the United Nations had 51 member states, mostly from Europe. Because the United Nations was founded in part on the principle of the sovereignty of member states, it is not and cannot become a world government with ultimate authority over its members. UN decisions are not binding on member states without the consent of those states. Like international law, the UN contributes to global governance by setting obligations and rules of behavior for member states. The United Nations Charter recognizes the rights of sovereign states and their obligations as members of the international community, while emphasizing the importance of multilateral cooperation as the cornerstone to peace and prosperity for all. Member states commit to use peaceful means to settle disputes and to uphold and support UN decisions. The Charter specifies that the UN may intervene to stop acts of aggression or threats to the peace, and that member states are only to use force in self-defense. The UN website displays the organization's slogan, Peace, Dignity, and Equality on a Healthy Planet. The three overarching goals of the United Nations are promoting peace, ensuring human rights, and achieving sustainable development with a focus on protecting the environment, all collective goods that can be elusive in a system of sovereign states, each concerned only with its own survival and well-being. In service of the goal to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, 19, the UN has been involved in peacekeeping activities in areas of interstate conflict since the late 1940s. In 1948, UN member states signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UNDHR, which lays out principles such as the right to freedom of religion, freedom of family choices, and freedom to travel. It became the foundational document for the protection of human rights worldwide. 20. Eleanor Roosevelt displays a large poster with the text of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in English. Figure 15. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt, served as the chairperson for the delegation that drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 21. Credit. Eleanor Roosevelt holding poster of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in English, Lake Success, New York. November 1949, by FDR Presidential Library and Museum/Flickr, CC by 2. 0. Recognition of the dignity of each person and their inalienable rights sets the stage for many other UN activities. The UN's ability to coordinate international solutions to problems and to marshal funds and expertise has helped many states, especially in the developing world, achieve better economic, educational, health, and environmental outcomes. How is the UN structured? The UN is organized into 6 main bodies: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Secretariat, the Trusteeship Council, and the International Court of Justice. In addition, dozens of related IGOs work on issues in conjunction with or under the auspices of the United Nations. 22. The International Court of Justice was discussed above. This section turns to the other 5 main UN bodies. An organizer shows the main bodies of the United Nations: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. The Trusteeship Council was suspended in 1994. Figure 15. 5. The United Nations is organized into 6 main bodies. Attribution: Copyright Rice University OpenStax under CC by 4. 0. License: the General Assembly. Each of the 193 UN member states has equal representation, regardless of its size or wealth, in the primary deliberative organ of the United Nations, the General Assembly, GA. The GA serves as a venue for states to discuss the most pressing international challenges, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, armed conflict, illicit trade, poverty, and hunger, as well as systemic problems such as wealth inequality and intolerance. Every state in the world faces these troubles to varying degrees, and thus the quest for solutions is a quest to provide collective goods. At its annual meeting, GA members deliberate policies and goals for the international community, elect members to the Security Council, and discuss reports from other UN organs. The Security Council. The Security Council performs the UN's most crucial peacemaking work. 15 member states sit on the Security Council. 10 are elected by the General Assembly to 2-year terms, while the other 5 seats, known as the Permanent 5 belong to the victors of World War II and the primary architects of the United Nations, the United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and the People's Republic of China, PRC. The P5 have veto power over any Security Council action. Even if the other 14 states on the Council agree with a given action, the veto of any one of the P5 will block the action. Admission to membership in the United Nations requires the affirmative vote of 9 Security Council members and no vetoes from within the P5. Though the General Assembly has more than tripled in size, the structure of the Security Council has only changed once, when in 1965 the number of members was expanded from 11 to 15. There is ongoing discussion about increasing the size of the Security Council beyond 15 states, and some advocate for expanding the P5 since the Security Council has no permanent representative from Latin America, Africa, or the Middle East. The Security Council monitors international conflict, facilitates diplomatic resolutions to disputes, and may place sanctions on member states engaged in violence. To stop ongoing or impending conflict or violations of international law, the Security Council has authorized military intervention, e.g., in response to North Korea's aggression against South Korea in 1950 and in response to Iraq's 1990 invasion of Kuwait, levied sanctions, e.g., in 2006 against Iran for refusing to stop its uranium enrichment process in its quest for nuclear weapons, and imposed arms embargoes, e.g., against Serbia in 1998 for ongoing aggression against Kosovo. The Security Council also provides a space for multilateral discussion about transnational threats to international security such as terrorism, poverty, migration and refugees, and trafficking of goods and people. The Economic and Social Council. The Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, is a primary driver of global governance policy aimed at dealing with the collective problems facing the world community. Former Secretary-General Dag Hammarskjöld explained, while the Security Council exists primarily for settling conflicts, the Economic and Social Council exists primarily to eliminate the causes of conflicts. 23 ECOSOC's responsibilities span economic and social issues. Dozens of sub-agencies are housed under the ECOSOC umbrella, including regional development agencies and issue-specific organizations. In particular, ECOSOC focuses on development, or raising the standard of living for people around the world through economic expansion and improved access to resources common throughout wealthier states, such as electricity, sanitation, education, and health care. In recent years, ECOSOC has focused on how to incorporate care for the environment in the drive for economic prosperity, a concept known as sustainable development. Since 2015, the United Nations has focused on helping member states achieve Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, a set of 17 objectives that broadly address ending poverty, protecting the planet, and improving the lives and prospects of everyone, everywhere. 24 These goals are part of the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. ECOSOC coordinates the work on these goals and collects the data required to measure progress toward their achievement. The Secretariat. The UN Secretariat performs administrative work. Upon the recommendation of the Security Council, the General Assembly elects the head of the Secretariat, the Secretary-General, for a 5-year renewable term. The Secretary-General engages in leadership, diplomacy, and public outreach to promote the UN, to draw international attention to urgent issues, and to raise money for UN activities. Trusteeship Council. At the time of the founding of the UN in 1946, much of the world was under European colonial control. The Trusteeship Council was formed to allow the UN to administer the former colonial territories that had belonged to the defeated powers of World War II. Germany, Italy, and Japan, all territories placed in trust to the United Nations, subsequently attained independence. While it still exists per the UN Charter, the Trusteeship Council is currently inactive. What tools does the UN have to help keep peace? The main mission of the UN is to keep the peace by enhancing transparency, providing countries with a forum in which to peacefully resolve disputes, and engaging in projects aimed at alleviating the causes of conflict. The Security Council can send UN representatives, troops, police, observers, and civilians to conflict zones. UN peacekeepers are deployed at the request of the warring parties and with the authorization of the Security Council. 3 guiding principles undergird the UN deployment of peacekeepers. 1. Consent of the parties. 2. Impartiality. And 3. Non-use of force except in self-defense or in defense of a Security Council mandate. 25. A group of United Nations peacekeepers stand together wearing camouflage and bright blue helmets with the letters UN on the side. Figure 15. 6 UN peacekeepers are often referred to as blue helmets. Credit. Over 200 Nepalese peacekeepers arrive in Juba by Isaac Billy UN Photo, CC by 20. Photo courtesy, USIP, www, UZIP.org. In 2020, there were approximately a dozen ongoing UN peacekeeping missions, mostly in the Middle East and Africa. The first UN peacekeeping mission was in 1948, monitoring the armistice between Israel and its Arab neighbors. In 1949, peacekeepers were sent to the border between India and Pakistan to monitor a ceasefire agreement in Kashmir. Both of those missions were small in scale. Unarmed peacekeepers were sent to monitor an existing ceasefire. Both are still active. More than 3,000 UN peacekeepers from 120 countries have died in this service. 26. UN specialized agencies and related IGOs. Numerous IGOs work to address specific global issues. Some, like the World Trade Organization (WTO) and the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA), operate independently but share information with the UN and help support the UN's mission. Global IGOs such as the Universal Postal Union (UPU) and the World Meteorological Organization (WMO) are specialized agencies operating within the UN framework. These agencies act autonomously with their own constitutions, leaders, headquarters, and bureaucratic organizations. Table 15. 1 highlights the mission, accomplishments, and goals of the 3 most significant global IGOs. The World Health Organization, WHO, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, WTO, working on the collective good issues of global health, economic development, and international trade. Respectively, these organizations provide guidelines for state behavior, encourage and enable countries to share information and data, and collaborate on policymaking. IGO primary purpose activities, notable accomplishments, current goals. World Health Organization (WHO) to track and combat disease and improve health worldwide, public health education, immunization campaigns, data gathering, and coordination of international health initiatives such as pandemic response, elimination of smallpox, near elimination of polio, dramatic reductions of malaria and yellow fever, triple billion goal. 1 billion more people benefiting from universal health coverage, 1 billion more people better protected from health emergencies, 1 billion more people enjoying better health and well-being. 27. World Bank to create sustainable economic growth in the poorest countries by investing in human capital and ending extreme poverty. 28 funds projects designed to alleviate poverty and help people around the world have access to food, water, education, healthcare, sanitation, transportation, and energy, provided millions with access to health services, improved electric and water systems, improved highways, child immunizations, and teacher training. 29 to end extreme poverty, decrease the percentage of people living on less than $1.90 a day to no more than 3% by 2030, and to promote shared prosperity, promote income growth of the bottom 40% of the population in each country. 30. World Trade Organization (WTO) to open trade worldwide and provide a forum for trade negotiations, and to settle disputes. 31 sets rules for global trade and helps countries avoid costly and dangerous trade wars, increased world trade and decreased average tariffs. Increased income of members. 32 to help trade flow smoothly, freely, and predictably. Table 15. 1 Major global IGOs. Show me the data. The World Bank Open Data website provides free and open access to innovative visuals that tell the stories of global development data. You can explore a walkthrough of the 2020 Sustainable Development Goals at the World Bank Data blog, where you can see examples of these detailed and interactive data visualizations. What constrains the effectiveness of the UN and global IGOs? In IGOs, sovereign states represent their own interests, bringing their own cultures and ideas to discussions of global governance, and IGOs are limited in their ability to intervene in the domestic affairs of member states. Although the purpose of IGOs is to help states work cooperatively, and though they strive to help states coordinate activities in pursuit of collective goods, in most circumstances, states place their own desires and interests above those of the broader international community. For example, ideally all states would work together to promote collective security by punishing aggressor states. In practice, states often cannot agree on what constitutes aggression or are unwilling to hold their allies accountable. Similarly, global poverty might be more easily eliminated if all countries worked together and pooled resources, but most countries are anxious to keep the gains of prosperity to themselves and dedicate only a small percentage of their wealth to help other countries. Countries that refuse to lock down or promote vaccination might prolong the COVID-19 pandemic despite the actions of other states following WHO guidelines to control it. Funding is another limitation on the effectiveness of the United Nations. UN member states pay dues based on their wealth relative to other member states. The United States pays 22% of the operating expenses of the United Nations and almost 28% of its peacekeeping budget. China now pays the second highest amount toward the peacekeeping budget at 15%, 33. Video. Let's talk WTO. The World Trade Organization establishes rules governing international trade and provides a venue for trade negotiations between countries. Another limit on the UN is its inability to enforce its decisions or rules. In many ways, it is an aspirational body. The General Assembly passes resolutions, but often without any real expectation that they will be implemented and without the ability to impose consequences if they are not. Sometimes the Security Council or others working on treaties or building international law use those resolutions to help justify sanctions or other punitive measures against states. According to the United Nations, GA resolutions have been a constant driver for the development of space law and international cooperation of member states in their space activities. Many provisions of the General Assembly resolutions related to outer space have become widely accepted by the international space community. 34. Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to explain the purpose of regional IGOs and give examples. Differentiate between the missions of NATO and the EU. Explain how the missions of NATO and the EU have evolved over time. Describe causes of tension within regional IGOs. Discuss the ways regional IGOs contribute to global governance. Much of the work of global governance is done at the regional level. IGOs such as the Arab League, the Organization of American States, OAS, and the African Union AU have extended the UN model to regional affairs, and IGOs like the Southern African Development Community, SADC. The Mercado Común del Sur, MERCOSUR, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, and the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, have extended it to sub-regional affairs. Regional IGOs work to improve the quality of life for people in a given region by encouraging economic development, facilitating trade, and/or enhancing security. They seek to lessen conflict by enabling cooperation and dialogue between neighboring states and by promoting common interests. Regional IGOs may become involved in any issue of common interest to states in the region, such as protection, trade, climate change, migration, or human trafficking. Military alliances focus on the coordination of military policy, while economic IGOs focus more on promoting trade and economic progress. IGOs composed of mostly democratic states can promote and reinforce democratic norms, punishing member states that stray from democratic practices. The African Union took just such steps when it responded to the 2013 military coup in Egypt by suspending Egypt's membership in the IGO. 35. Over time, regional IGOs may broaden their scope, increasing the levels of cooperation between member states. The idea that cooperation on small, discrete policy areas such as coordinating postal services or air traffic control can create mutual trust and evolve into cooperation on larger, more complex issues is called functionalism. This is illustrated in the case of the European Union, where the original economic union evolved to include a multitude of domestic and foreign policy issues such as the environment, health, labor, security, and immigration. Ultimately, what began as a union of states concerned with individual and regional economic growth developed into an organization espousing common values and objectives that extended to a wide variety of issues traditionally within the sole purview of individual sovereign states. The largest and oldest regional IGO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Headquartered in Brussels, Belgium, NATO is the most powerful military alliance in the world, with 30 member states and combined forces of over 2 million troops. In 2019, NATO states accounted for 54% of global military spending. 36. In an anarchic system, security IGOs increase predictability by making public member states military commitments. Alliances are designed to serve as deterrents against attacks on any member states, as potential attackers know they would face the combined strength of the alliance in response. Alliances also coordinate policy responses to international events and to the foreign policy decisions of non-allied states, thus making accidental or impulsive military action less likely. NATO's purpose and current mission. The United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, Denmark, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, and Portugal formed NATO in 1949 to safeguard U.S. allies in Europe by deterring a Soviet attack. In 1952, Greece and Turkey joined NATO, and Germany joined 3 years later. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty promised collective defense, assuring members that an attack on one or more of them shall be considered an attack against them all. 37. The individual security concerns of each NATO country were subsumed by what they considered the shared existential threat of communist expansion or Soviet nuclear attack. President Harry Truman and Vice President Alben Barkley stand together on a dais in front of a table festooned with plants and flowers, looking on while U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson signs a document. A crowd sits in rows around them. Figure 15. 7. U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson signs the Washington Treaty creating NATO in 1949. Credit. Secretary of State Dean Acheson signs the Washington Treaty, April 4, 1949. President Harry Truman and Vice President Alben Barkley are standing next to him. By records of the Office of the Chief Signal Officer, the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration, CC-01. 0. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, creating 15 new states, the largest of which is Russia. Instead of dissolving in response, NATO expanded, ultimately including both many Eastern European states that had previously been allied with the Soviet Union and some former Soviet states. Part of NATO's original purpose was to forbid the revival of nationalist militarism in Europe through a strong North American presence on the continent, and to encourage European political integration. 38. Thus, after 1991, NATO offered membership to any state that could meet the political and financial obligations of membership. After the end of the Cold War, NATO's mission shifted from fighting communism to preserving the general security of member states and the international community. With the addition of North Macedonia in 2020, NATO had 30 member states. As of this writing, 3 additional countries are seeking membership, and another 30, including most of the states of the former Soviet Union, have joined NATO's Partnership for Peace program. A map shows the 30 members of NATO color-coded according to when they joined the alliance. The 12 founding members, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, the United Kingdom, and the United States joined in 1949. The other member countries are Greece and Turkey 1952, Germany 1955, Spain 1982, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland 1999. Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia 2004, Albania and Croatia 2009, Montenegro 2017, and North Macedonia 2020. When the German reunification occurred in 1990, East Germany also became a part of NATO. Figure 15. 8. Since its formation in 1949, NATO has expanded to include 30 member states. Attribution: Copyright Rice University, OpenStax under CC BY 40 license. NATO invoked the Collective Defense Agreement of Article 5 for the first time following the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks on the United States. In response to those attacks, the United States attacked the Taliban government in Afghanistan. The United Nations authorized a NATO-led peace-building force to establish a new government and stabilize the country. NATO can deploy a unified command military force to engage in armed conflict. Since the end of the Cold War, NATO has intervened in international crises, monitored security threats, trained security forces, and undertaken peace-building in Kosovo since 1999 and Afghanistan 2003-2021. 39. What kinds of conflicts exist within NATO? As with all IGOs, NATO's primary challenge is managing the varied interests of its members and creating common policy acceptable to all. However, in security organizations like NATO, the influence of the most powerful state is more pronounced. Throughout the Cold War, NATO depended on the promise of U.S. military force. The United States dictates NATO policy more than, say, Germany dictates what happens in the EU, and more than the UK influences what happens at the United Nations. In the post-Soviet world, and with the addition of members outside Western Europe, U.S. power in NATO has weakened as the organization has had to balance the needs and concerns of other member states. NATO allies do not always agree. Although NATO has insisted that it is not an enemy of Russia, Russia's aggressive actions in Crimea and toward Ukraine have caused concern among many NATO member states, especially those with borders near Russia. In 2016, NATO called Russia a challenge to the alliance and a source of regional instability. 40. However, some members of NATO, including some larger Western European states, are reluctant to take any action that might be seen as aggressive toward Russia. 41. Varying conceptions of security threats are natural given the differing size and geographic location of member states. These variations complicate the creation of unified policy priorities and responses. Video. NATO sends ships, planes to Eastern Europe as Ukraine conflict heats up. The Russian invasion of Ukraine threatened Europe and the prevailing world order. Because of those threats, and because of the potential direct threat to NATO countries like Poland that border Ukraine, NATO strengthened defenses in the area, even though Ukraine was not a member of NATO at the time. Another source of conflict is burden sharing, that is, how much each country should contribute to the funding and operations of the alliance. The two wealthiest NATO countries, the United States and Germany, each pay 16% of the operating costs, and each country is called to allocate 2% of its GDP to defense expenditures. Due to the size of the United States GDP and its allocation of 3–4% of its GDP to defense, in 2020 the United States spending on defense made up 69% of the overall NATO defense spending. 42. Regional security IGOs since the forming of NATO. Many regional multi-purpose IGOs, such as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and the African Union, have a security function within a broader framework of regional cooperation and promotion of the common good. 43. The United Nations has called upon regional organizations to support peacekeeping work both on their own and in cooperation with the UN. At an August 2015 summit, then UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said, "The United Nations increasingly shares responsibility for peace and security with regional organizations. We should do everything possible to help them resolve regional problems and to include the states concerned in solutions. At the same time, regional organizations should continue contributing to United Nations peace and security efforts." 44. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, calls itself the world's largest security organization. 45. It works on a broad range of security initiatives, including arms control, terrorism prevention, preventative diplomacy, and peacebuilding. It has offices in member countries that monitor current and potential zones of conflict. Two soldiers dressed in camouflage sit on the ground beside a tank with the letters AU painted on the side. Figure 15. 9. The African Union Mission in Somalia, AMISOM, has supported the Somali National Army in its efforts to counter militant groups in the ongoing Somali civil war. Credit: On Night Operations with the African Union Mission in Somalia 11 by AMISOM Public Information/Flickr, public domain. Africa has been the most conflict-prone continent in the 21st century. The African Union, the largest and best-resourced regional organization on the continent, has a spotty regional security and peacekeeping record. In 2002, the AU ratified the African Peace and Security Architecture Plan, which enlisted regional economic organizations and other partners to address security challenges on the continent. 46 sub-regional economic organizations, such as the Economic Community of West African States and the Southern African Development Community, have played an increasingly prominent role in handling security issues, particularly in Sierra Leone, Guinea, Liberia, Lesotho, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. European Union. Headquartered in Brussels, Belgium, the European Union (EU) is the largest and most influential regional economic IGO. Since the withdrawal of the United Kingdom, a move referred to as Brexit, in January of 2020, the EU includes 27 countries across the European continent. The EU began as a small-scale economic organization, but its mission has expanded to promote peace and solidarity among European countries. Although it recognizes the sovereignty of its member states, including their right to withdraw from the organization, the EU has moved far closer to the union of countries than has any other IGO. Most EU countries have adopted the common currency, the euro, and most allow citizens to travel and work across borders within the 26 countries, made up of most EU countries and a few non-EU countries, known as the Schengen area. Countries that apply for admission to the EU must meet certain entrance criteria, including an established free market economy and a democratic government. Candidate countries must adopt national legislation that aligns with admission criteria. Hence, applications may take years to finalize. The purpose of the EU. In 1951, Belgium, Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands formed the European Union to support their economic recovery from the devastation of World War II. Over the next 4 decades, the countries' economies became increasingly integrated. The Maastricht Treaty of 1993, which introduced the common currency and a commitment to common security and foreign policies, established the current structure of the EU. EU member states commit to a common set of values, stated in Article 2 of the EU Treaty and reinforced in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, that they consider central to European life. A society in which inclusion, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and non-discrimination prevail. 47. In addition to affirming human rights guarantees such as freedom of expression and freedom from torture, the Charter outlaws the death penalty, specifies the equality of the sexes, and protects cultural heritage. 48. The organizational structure of the EU. 5 main bureaucratic and political organs oversee and help guide EU activities and policies. Leaders of European states sit on the European Council, which meets several times a year and, working with the European Parliament, sets the broad priorities of the EU. European citizens directly elect the 705 members of the European Parliament to 5-year terms. These members represent 7 political groups from left to right on the political spectrum. The European Parliament plays both policy-making and budget oversight roles. A part of the EU executive branch, the European Commission, promotes EU interests. The European Parliament elects a president to head the 27-member College of Commissioners for a 5-year term. The Commission implements EU legislation, represents the EU internationally, and allocates funding for EU projects. Member states nominate commissioners, who are then approved by the European Parliament and serve as the bureaucratic heads of various policy agencies within the EU. The Council of the European Union works more like the United Nations, where each member state represents its own interests to the whole. The Council of the EU is a policy-making body that, along with the European Parliament, discusses and passes laws for the EU. Its members are empowered to commit their home states to any decisions the Council makes. Located in Luxembourg, the Court of Justice of the EU settles disputes arising under the laws of the European Union. The court can interpret, find countries in violation of, and sanction those who disobey that law. EU priorities. No issue is beyond the scope of the European Union. In many ways, it functions as a state in the international system, for its members coordinate policies and share common positions on international issues. The EU develops economic, defense, security, foreign, immigration, and labor policies that apply to each member state. Independence of action in any of these areas would be a concern to the organization. Thus, while member states retain their sovereignty in some senses, the EU has the ability to interfere in domestic issues and to punish noncompliance. Annually, the European Parliament publishes a list of issues that will be on the EU agenda for the coming year. In 2021, the issues included pandemic-related topics such as access to the COVID-19 vaccine and helping economies recover, social and humanitarian issues such as access to food, issues of discrimination. Cultural issues including the state of the performing arts and some of the big background changes shaping the world we live in today, the digital, environmental, and geopolitical challenges ahead. From Europe's borders to its transatlantic relationship. 49. Because the primary mission of the EU is to ensure the peace and prosperity of Europe, anything that threatens that mission is an issue of importance for the organization. What kinds of conflicts exist within the EU? When 27 countries, each with its own goals and ambitions, attempt to coordinate a unified response to common issues, tensions and conflicts are inevitable. Addressing the needs and desires of every EU member state and trying to reach agreement on a common policy is difficult, especially when the organization's mission incorporates so many different policy areas. The economies, politics, and cultures of the EU states differ, and these variations complicate efforts to create a European identity beyond the identity of the member states. 50. The EU's unification of so many traditional state functions, including economic and foreign policies, under a supranational umbrella has led to some backlash. Economic pressures on national governments can lessen the perceived benefit of being a part of the EU. Domestic constituents of wealthier states, who believe they are losing their sovereign identity and subsidizing poorer and weaker states, may become convinced that EU membership is no longer in their country's best interest. Although only the United Kingdom has entirely withdrawn from EU membership, political groups in many member states include anti-European Union, Eurosceptic sentiment in their platforms. The loss of the United Kingdom, a founding member and one of the wealthiest and most powerful states in the EU, represents a significant setback, and managing relations between the UK and the EU in the aftermath of Brexit is an ongoing challenge. Video. UK-EU post-Brexit relationship, rivals or good neighbors. The UK exit from the EU has necessitated a reimagining of the relationship between the UK and other European countries. Over time, the EU has expanded to include states that have not traditionally displayed the strongest records on democracy or human rights. Democratic backsliding in member states Poland and Hungary, and the rising strength of populist and nativist movements in other EU countries threaten democratic norms and institutions. The growth and aggressiveness of Russia and, to a lesser extent, China also pose foreign policy challenges to the EU. Prior to Brexit, some international relations literature discussed the EU as a unified great power capable of acting as a counterweight to Russia or China in international relations. Determining the appropriate role for the EU and how it should address different international relations challenges remains a vital task for the organization. 51. As former High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Javier Solana notes, in order to be an international actor, the EU must act in unison and speak with one voice. If each member state acts individually, Europe will find itself relegated to the role of mere spectator in the arena of major world events, with neither the capacity nor the power to influence their outcome. 52. Regional economic organizations. Encouraged by the success of the European Union, almost every region in the world has formed an economic IGO and a regional economic development bank. These regional economic organizations, REOs, aim to improve cooperation and facilitate economic development by increasing transparency, funding projects, encouraging free trade, and reducing economic conflict. A handful of regional IGOs, such as the African Union and the Arab League, are more general in nature, but almost all have a substantial focus on economic development. Because the success of an REO depends upon the peace and stability of a region, REOs are often pulled into efforts to enhance regional security. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, the successor to the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, is the world's largest free trade area. Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay established MERCOSUR, the Southern Common Market, Mercado Común del Sur, in 1991 to accelerate sustained economic development based on social justice, environmental protection, and poverty reduction. 53 in subsequent years, other countries in the region, including Venezuela and Bolivia, joined MERCOSUR as full or associate members. In 2017, MERCOSUR suspended Venezuela for failing to comply with democratic principles. 54 in 2011, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru founded a new Latin American trading bloc, the Pacific Alliance. The Pacific Alliance has decreased tariffs in the participating countries and increased trade with the European Union and countries in Asia. 55. In the Asia-Pacific region, the largest REO is ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Since Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand founded ASEAN in 1967, it has expanded to include Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia. ASEAN has both security and economic priorities. It has become one of the largest free trade areas in the world. Other types of regional IGOs. Some regional IGOs, like the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Arab League, are organized around a common identity. Others, like the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, are organized around shared economic interests. The 13 member countries of OPEC own approximately 75 to 80% of the world's known oil reserves. OPEC is open to any oil-producing state, and only the most powerful oil-producing states, such as Russia, China, and the United States, have opted not to join the organization. OPEC seeks to coordinate and unify the petroleum policies of its member countries and ensure the stabilization of oil markets in order to secure an efficient, economic, and regular supply of petroleum to consumers, a steady income to producers, and a fair return on capital for those investing in the petroleum industry. 56. The organization helps its members coordinate oil supply and pricing, which can, but does not always, provide relative stability and predictability in the petroleum market and avoid contentious trade wars. Video. OPEC prepares for an age of dwindling demand. The actions and oil production levels of OPEC countries affect oil prices around the world. Decreasing oil consumption, technological advancements, and efforts to lessen dependence on OPEC oil have provided incentives for some countries to leave OPEC, as Ecuador did effective January 1, 2020. How do regional IGOs contribute to global governance? From a realist perspective which focuses on the primacy of states, IGOs are most important as tools states can use to their own advantage. No IGO can act independently of its member states, and the largest states typically have disproportionate influence over an organization's actions. While realists might point to persistent war and poverty as evidence of the ineffectiveness of IGOs, liberal internationalists and constructivists tend to highlight how IGOs constrain state action, increase areas of cooperation, draw states together in unprecedented ways, and help alleviate the scourges of war and poverty, even if they have not yet eliminated them. For instance, both the number of people dying in war and the number of states engaged in war have dropped significantly since World War II. 57 also, since they are most directly impacted by the events in their own region, regional IGOs are better able than outside observers to monitor the actions of member states. For instance, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, recently held a meeting for regional IGOs to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on various cultural activities around the world, and to elicit promises from the participants to monitor and support the cultural and creative sectors in their regions as countries recover from the economic impacts of the pandemic. 58. IGOs that begin with a narrow scope are prone to expansion, particularly when member states see the benefits of working together. Organizations like the United Nations use language like urging global citizenship, promoting the good of all nations, and being a member of an international community to encourage states to rise above sovereign individualism and see themselves as contributing to and benefiting from membership in a valuable, cohesive group. The use of language reinforcing desired norms can change state behavior, reducing uncertainty and enhancing cooperation. Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to explain different types and purposes of NGOs, identify influential NGOs and their areas of emphasis, discuss the role of NGOs in global governance. Evaluate the contributions of NGOs. While most people are familiar with the work of the largest IGOs like the UN, NATO, or the EU, they may be less familiar with how non-governmental organizations, NGOs, contribute to global governance. NGOs operate independently of a government or state and are open to the citizens of various countries rather than to the countries themselves. NGOs engage in transnational relations, cross-border interactions that may happen with minimal or no government involvement. In some cases, NGOs collaborate with governments, but often the goals of NGOs and particular governments do not align, and their relationships become conflicted. The Union of International Associations lists over 8,500 NGOs worldwide. Depending on how they are counted, that number may be in the tens of thousands. 59 NGOs mobilize individuals around a common concern, and they help facilitate the work of the United Nations and other IGOs. In terms of global governance, NGOs are a part of the global civil society. That is, the arena in which groups come together to engage in collective action in the service of shared interests, values, and goals outside government or profit-based motivations. What do NGOs do? In most cases, NGOs are designed to address a transnational concern, like the environment, humanitarian issues, healthcare, economic development, or conflict cessation, that is important to all and necessitates cooperation across borders. Within these broad areas, the majority of NGOs focus on specific issues, such as saving endangered species, conducting anti-malaria programs in tropical zones, or providing small loans to local farmers in South Asia. Often NGOs are the result of a moral crusade of one or a small group of concerned citizens. For example, Henry Dunant founded the Red Cross in the mid-1800s to aid soldiers injured in war. Some other well-known NGOs include Doctors Without Borders, Greenpeace, and the World Wildlife Fund. Some NGOs have thousands of members, while others have only a few hundred, and their budgets and scope of impact are similarly varied. The Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee (BRAC), with close to 100,000 people on staff, is the largest NGO in the world. Although NGOs exist in wealthy countries, most of the work of NGOs happens in the poorest and most conflict-torn areas of the world. In developing countries, NGOs often help fulfill needs that the government cannot, like providing access to adequate health care, nutrition, education, sanitation, or potable water. They also play an active role in the aftermath of natural disasters like hurricanes or floods and provide relief in emergency situations such as refugee or famine crises. Video: What is an NGO? Chris Enkwitsibwe of the Uganda NGO Forum provides a basic explanation of NGOs. The work of NGOs is expensive. In 2015, the 50 largest humanitarian NGOs alone spent $18 billion annually. 60 NGOs receive funding from a variety of sources, including member dues, grants from governments, development banks, and philanthropic foundations. Governments or IGOs may contract NGOs to do specific tasks in a broader development plan, and development, humanitarian, or disaster aid is funneled often through NGOs that have an established presence in the region. The World Bank estimates that over 15% of total overseas development aid is channeled through NGOs. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees allocates approximately 40% of its budget to over 800 partner NGOs. 61 Like government aid agencies in other states, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, partners with NGOs to deliver aid and to implement programming. 62 People sympathetic to an organization's mission provide the largest share of most organizations' budgets. What are some weaknesses of NGOs? NGOs can only work where governments accept their presence. Governments in strict authoritarian states like North Korea allow virtually no NGO activity, whereas governments in many other countries place almost no restrictions on NGOs. In recent years, however, more governments have placed restrictions on NGO activities in their states. 63 in particular, human rights groups and religiously affiliated organizations meet with resistance in some countries that view them as undermining the government or national unity. NGO Scope of Operation Year Founded Issue Area Website Greenpeace 3 million members, offices in 40 countries 1971 Largest environmental organization in the world https://www.greenpeace Org International Doctors Without Borders Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, employs 30,000 and works in more than 70 countries 1971 Medical humanitarian assistance to victims of conflict, natural disasters, epidemics, or healthcare exclusion https://www.Doctors Without Borders Org Mercy Corps works in over 40 countries, reaching 50 million people 1979 Global Aid Agency, helping people survive crises, escape poverty, and transform communities https://www.mercycorps Org Open Society Foundation works in 120 countries, spends over $1 billion each year 1993 promotion of democracy around the world https://www.Open Society Foundations Org Table 15 2 Sampling of major non-governmental organizations. Some criticize NGOs for being too narrowly focused on a specific issue rather than working on larger systemic problems. Some contend that NGOs should better coordinate with other actors rather than working in isolation, and that reliance on Western donors leads NGOs to focus on projects that are more easily sold instead of those that are arguably more critical. NGOs may not be interested in or able to solve the root cause of a particular problem, and hence the solutions they provide may be temporary. Observers scrutinize NGOs, like many nonprofit organizations, for how much of their budgets go toward fundraising, advertising, and overhead, rather than to directly helping their stated cause. What role do NGOs play in providing collective goods? NGOs have been a presence at the UN since its earliest days, when they successfully lobbied the UN to include the promotion of human rights as part of its mission in the UN Charter. 64 Approximately 6,000 NGOs currently have consultative status with ECOSOC, which allows them to have input into policy discussions and to access UN documents. International treaties provide collective goods, and NGOs have had significant input into the formation of most contemporary treaties, including the Paris Agreement, climate change, and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. NGOs often form groups that work together to advance common goals. For instance, religious NGOs created the Committee of Religious NGOs at the UN, which has its own meetings and coordinates policies and responses to issues of common concern. 65 During the years of negotiations over the Rome Treaty, interested NGOs formed a group called the Coalition for the International Criminal Court to help draft and convince states to ratify the treaty. Two other NGO coalitions, the International Campaign to Ban Landmines and the Cluster Munition Coalition, were central in drafting and convincing states to join the Mine Ban Treaty 1997 and the Convention on Cluster Munitions 2010, respectively. NGOs have had the most success lobbying for the adoption of international human rights treaties. 66 In the 1960s, Peter Benenson formed the influential human rights NGO Amnesty International to pressure governments to release political prisoners. A person wearing an orange jumpsuit stands in front of a marble building that is decorated with a statue of a seated figure and Greek columns. A black hood completely covers the person's head and face. Behind the person, a uniformed police officer stands on the steps of the building. Figure 15. 10 In 2007, Amnesty International protested the 6th anniversary of the arrival of detainees at the controversial U.S. military prison at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. Credit: Black Hood Orange Jumpsuit Board Cop, Authority of Law statue by James Earl Fraser outside the 3rd Guantanamo hearing at the Supreme Court, Washington, D.C., by Takamabablot/Flickr. Public domain. Amnesty International has played an essential role in ensuring the adoption of at least 3 core international human rights treaties. The Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the Torture Convention, 1984, the Rome Treaty, 2002, and the Arms Trade Treaty, 2014. In 1997, Amnesty International won the Nobel Peace Prize for its work. How do NGOs contribute to global governance? In addition to drafting and convincing states to sign international treaties, NGOs help IGOs and state-based development agencies. They engage in information sharing and advocacy efforts, assist in emergencies, and play a key role in reinforcing the legitimacy of global governance. 67 NGOs also help monitor compliance with international treaties, often, as in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, under authority granted by the treaties themselves. 68 As NGO expert Peter Willits noted, were it not for NGOs, there would be no international law of human rights and no UN machinery to protect them. 69 Due to the nature of their work on the front lines in countries around the world, NGOs often have more information about what is happening in another country than a government or IGO has. This allows NGOs to serve as informal monitors of state behavior. By providing evidence and testimonies, NGOs can draw international attention to situations such as human rights abuses or worsening humanitarian or environmental conditions. Such pressure may cause governments to change their policies or provide critical aid to regions that may have been under-resourced. 70 Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to discuss different types of non-state actors beyond NGOs and their purposes, discuss the role of non-state actors in international relations, explain the factors contributing to the rise of non-state actors, describe the sources of power for non-state actors, analyze the ways non-traditional non-state actors present challenges for international relations and state sovereignty. Non-state actors beyond NGOs like multinational corporations, national identity groups, religious groups, and transnational organized criminal groups present challenges and opportunities for global governance. Multinational corporations, MNCs, also known as multinational enterprises, MNEs, are companies with headquarters in one country that have operations in at least one additional country. These transnational actors influence state policy and international politics, especially in the areas of trade, workers' rights, and the environment. Because countries rely on the money and jobs multinational corporations generate, and because MNCs possess vast resources, they exert tremendous influence on international affairs. Examples of MNCs according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development UNCTAD, in 2006 almost 80,000 MNCs were active around the world. That number fell to 60,000 in 2018, even as the combined worth of active MNCs rose. 71 MNCs account for half of global exports, nearly a third of the world's wealth, and about a fourth of all global employment. 72 Given the immense wealth and power of the largest MNCs, University of North Carolina instructor and former senior reporter for foreign policy David Francis has referred to them as corporate nations. 73 Apple, for example, is wealthier than 90% of the world's countries. 74 The most profitable MNCs are in the tech, oil, and finance industries. 75 About 45% of MNCs are headquartered in the United States, including ExxonMobil, Amazon, Coca-Cola, Walmart, Apple, and financial giant Berkshire Hathaway. U.S. multinational enterprises employed 42.5 million workers worldwide in 2017, with the largest number of workers in China, the United Kingdom, Mexico, India, and Canada. 76 In the globalized world, MNCs are less bound to remain headquartered in their state of origin. As international relations specialist Parag Khanna notes, MNCs choose locations for personnel, factories, executive suites, or bank accounts based on where regulations are friendly, resources abundant, and connectivity seamless. 77 What are some criticisms of MNCs? By their very nature, MNCs prioritize private goods profit over public goods. While they have the power to do good in their host countries, they often choose to set up operations in those countries because the countries are too weak to prevent them from exploiting labor and resources. Many developing countries do not force MNCs to pay minimum wages, to provide health care, to follow labor laws, or to abide by environmental regulations. In fact, the enormous wealth of MNCs enables them to disregard any rules a weak state has in place or to lobby against the future implementation of such regulations. MNCs are notorious for seeking profit above social benefits or even benefits to their country of origin. Many of the largest and most profitable MNCs are structured to avoid taxation and regulation and will operate wherever profit margins are highest. Video: what is a multinational? International law seeks to keep up with the actions of hugely influential multinational corporations. Do MNCs contribute to global governance? Although they may not seem as political as IGOs and NGOs, the transnational activities of MNCs have transformed the nature of international trade and investment. Decisions MNCs make have enormous implications for a wide range of policy issues like taxation, investment protection, and immigration across many countries with different political and economic institutions. 78 MNCs do exert some positive influence over international relations. Because MNCs favor stable and secure environments, states looking to lure MNCs have a vested interest in maintaining stability and in settling disagreements diplomatically rather than through disruptive conflict. Because they benefit from seamless operations, MNCs facilitate transportation and communication across borders by building compatible infrastructures like phone lines, internet access, and standardized pricing in countries around the world. Trade organizations like the WTO regulate MNCs, and trade treaties help determine the norms of behavior in trade and intellectual property. Video: what's the role of multinational companies in fueling conflicts? When multinational corporations invest in a country, they can be funding, either directly or indirectly, that country's activities, including its military conflicts. Because they generate money, MNCs also have considerable clout with host governments and have the power to encourage states to uphold human rights and environmental protections. In addition to providing jobs for people in developing countries, MNCs can reinvest in local economies, for instance, by donating money for schools or hospitals or providing community services. MNCs can and often do partner with or donate to NGOs to benefit local populations in developing countries. In 2000, the United Nations created the Global Compact to address the way MNCs could play a role in global governance. 79. The Global Compact asks companies to self-regulate by following set principles around human rights, the environment, and anti-corruption efforts. Almost 15,000 companies have joined the Global Compact, and businesses and states have committed to promoting development goals and sustainability. 80. National identity groups. Members of national identity groups share a common ethnic, religious, or linguistic identity and object to the political or territorial status quo. Typically, these groups are struggling for greater autonomy or recognition. They may be clustered in a specific region of a country, and they often represent a minority in that region, with grievances stemming from real or perceived marginalization and oppression that has left the group at a disadvantage. Even when these groups are primarily located within one state, such as the Rohingya in Myanmar or Basques in Spain, migration and globalization have a way of internationalizing their concerns. These groups often demand more representation in government, the protection of linguistic or religious traditions, and the right to establish institutions distinct from those of the country in which they reside. National identity groups may seek regional autonomy, relative independence from a central government, secession, breaking away from a state, or irredentism, reclaiming land. Regional autonomy movements. Groups seeking greater regional autonomy are among those that are least likely to directly impact international relations. Autonomous regions within states have considerable control over regional governance, including education, language, and local laws. Examples of autonomous regions include the Åland Islands, Finland, South Tyrol, Italy, Kosovo, the former Yugoslavia, Cordillera and Mindanao, the Philippines, Zanzibar, Tanzania, Greenland, Denmark, and Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, the UK. Regional autonomy is often a relatively peaceful solution to accommodate the demands of ethnic minorities. Secessionist movements. Some groups are not interested in regional autonomy or other concessions from the government, but instead favor establishing an independent state. In democratic states, these secessionist movements may resolve non-violently via a sovereignty referendum that asks members of the minority group to vote on whether they want independence. South Sudan, East Timor, and Montenegro gained independence following referendums. Other groups win independence through warfare. Such was the case in Eritrea, although that victory was followed by a referendum declaring the Eritrean public's desire for independence. Other ethnic groups' efforts to gain independence have been less successful. For example, the efforts of citizens of the Catalonia region of Spain and of the Kurds in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey have been met with silence or oppression. In 2020, there were 60 active secessionist movements, with only one or two expected to lead to independence. 81 A large mass of people fill a tree-lined street, their arms raised, many waving Catalan flags. Figure 15. 11 Catalan separatists rally in support of independence from Spain in 2014. Credit, Demanding to Vote, by Joan Campderos Iconas/Flickr, CC by 2. 0. When independence movements are successful, a new state joins the world community. UN membership is considered the marker of an independent state. Maps are redrawn, and new bilateral and multilateral agreements can be negotiated. Numerous states joined that community in the 1960s as colonialism fell around the world. Irredentist movements, a region under the political control of one country but ethnically tied to another, is called an irredenta. Often, the ethnic group in the region constitutes a minority in the state where they live but a majority in a neighboring state. This particular configuration is ripe for conflict, either because people within the region want to leave their state to join their ethnic kin, or because the country where the ethnic group is a majority wants to reclaim their lost territory and reunite the ethnic group. 82 For instance, during World War II, Hitler claimed that he wanted Germany for the Germans, which gave him cause to expand German borders to include the Germanic people living in neighboring countries. More recently, Russian President Vladimir Putin used a similar excuse when he occupied the Crimea, a territory in the country of Ukraine that is heavily populated by ethnic Russians. As these examples suggest, irredentist rhetoric can be cover for a traditional political strategy of territorial expansion to gain power and influence. Video Crimea 4 years after the Russian takeover, Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea and its aftermath suggest Russia's continuing cultural and territorial goals in the region. Religious non-state actors. According to the Pew Research Center, approximately 84% of the population in the world identifies with a religion. There are thousands of different religious groups in the world, but 77% of the world's religious adherents are part of one of the 5 largest religions: Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, or Judaism. 83 religious organizations or groups of adherents to a faith are known as religious non-state actors, RNAs. RNAs include individuals motivated by religious beliefs, by specific churches, by religious-based NGOs, and even by the transnational nature of the religious beliefs themselves. The Catholic Church has historically played a prominent role in international relations, and the Holy See, the governing body of the Church, has observer status at the United Nations. Given that there are almost 1 billion Catholics worldwide, the Pope has tremendous global influence. 84 RNAs can organize themselves or specific categories of their work into NGOs. The International Islamic Charitable Organization and Catholic Relief Services are examples of this type of NGO. Many religious groups use NGOs to help the marginalized and the impoverished, extending their reach far beyond their local community. The transnational nature of religious beliefs are transnational. There are few religions the adherents of which all reside in one state. Adherents to a given faith often feel a form of kinship or solidarity with others of that faith regardless of regional, linguistic, ethnic, or practical differences. Jews in the United States who have never visited Israel may feel a kinship with the Israelis. Muslims worldwide orient themselves toward Mecca to pray even if they have never been to Saudi Arabia. Terrorist attacks on religious groups, such as the bombings in Sri Lanka in 2019 on Christians celebrating the Easter holiday, are seen and may in fact be intended as an attack on the religion itself, not just on certain individuals. The role of religious leaders. Individual religious leaders can use their platform to comment upon and try to influence world affairs. Exiled religious cleric Ayatollah Khomeini instigated the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979. The Dalai Lama of Tibet put forward a democratic constitution based on Buddhist principles and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a model for a future free Tibet. For his work in addressing collective problems including international conflicts, human rights issues, and global environmental problems, the Dalai Lama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989. 85 From the 1930s to the 1950s, Catholic popes Pius XI and Pius XII condemned communism as antithetical to the Catholic faith and helped fuel anti-Soviet sentiment among Catholics worldwide. In 2020, Pope Francis urged governments around the world to use the COVID-19 pandemic to focus on creating a fairer market economy, addressing the rapidly escalating dangers of climate change, and providing basic health care to their citizens. 86 Two people wearing head scarves walked down the street in front of an Ayatollah Khomeini mural hung on the side of a brick building. Figure 15. 12 A mural depicting Ayatollah Khomeini outside the former U.S. Embassy in Tehran reflects his lasting influence. Credit, Imam Khomeini by Kamir Adil/Flickr. CC by 20. Violence in the name of religion. Schisms within religions, such as between Catholics and Protestants in the Christian faith, between ultra-Orthodox and Reform movements in Judaism, or between Sunnis and Shiites in Islam, can lead to enduring conflict and even violence. Religious leaders can position threats to the faith from outside as a rallying or unifying force. Osama bin Laden, former leader of the al-Qaeda terrorist organization, issued a manifesto against Christian invaders in Muslim holy lands as a call to all Muslims, not just Sunni Muslims, to join his fight. Similarly, the 1948 establishment of the State of Israel and the subsequent displacement of Palestinian Muslims met with resistance from both Sunnis and Shiites. RNAs can form communities of the faithful to advocate for changes in far-flung corners of the world where they believe their brothers and sisters are persecuted or oppressed. 87 Although many RNAs advocate for peace and devote themselves to humanitarian missions, others engage in conflict for the good. That is, they believe their cause is so important that they are justified in using any means, including violence, to achieve it. This level of conviction propelled Catholic soldiers during the Crusades in the Middle Ages, and it motivates several notable religious groups today, including Al-Qaeda and the militant Hindu nationalist group Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh RSS. 88 Two groups of people dressed in combat fatigues and cloth head coverings sit in the back of two pickup trucks in a dry, sandy landscape. Several of the people hold long guns. Another person stands to the left wearing light brown camouflage and a dark cloth head covering. Figure 15. 13 ethnic tribal militias like the Tuareg, pictured here, have joined with other militant Islamic groups in attempts to secure an independent homeland in northern Mali. Credit, Al-Qaeda draws Maghreb militants to Mali. Al-Qaeda rejoint par ses militants du Maghreb au Mali by Magherbia/Flickr. CC by 20. How do RNAs contribute to global governance? It is difficult to classify a particular RNA and that RNA's role in global governance as good or bad. Some RNAs help reinforce norms and participate in conversations about the global good, but others promote violence and challenge global governance norms. The net contribution of a single RNA can be mixed. The Muslim Brotherhood provides a telling example. Although the Egyptian government considered the Muslim Brotherhood an illegal political movement and classified it as a terrorist organization, the Brotherhood provided goods and services like hospitals and schools to Egyptian neighborhoods where the government was not providing those services. During periods of Egyptian democracy, the Brotherhood ran candidates for office and participated in the legislature. 89 Thus, the Brotherhood has engaged in both humanitarian and politically democratic activities and illegal, anti-democratic, and violent ones. Violent non-state actors, transnational actors that flagrantly violate established laws and employ violence to achieve their goals are considered illegitimate. They endanger security, stability, and the rule of law and are condemned under international law as a threat to global governance. 90 Like RNAs, sometimes the lines between legitimate and illegitimate transnational actors are blurred. Some nationalist and religious groups may pose a threat to peace and stability only in particular regions or for particular groups. Sometimes whether a non-state actor is considered legitimate depends on who you ask. As a saying from the Cold War era goes, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. This discussion focuses on two main types of violent non-state actors: transnational organized crime, TOC, syndicates, and terrorist organizations. These groups engage in various types of illegal activity, including financial crimes, cybercrimes, and human rights violations. Their membership may be multinational, regional, or country-specific, but their crimes are transnational, involving activities across borders and in multiple states. They pose a significant threat to international and domestic security, and countering that threat requires a coordinated international response. Criminal networks flourish in weak states, those without functioning central governments, sophisticated criminal justice agencies, communications, or traditions of rule of law. Weak states often only nominally control certain regions of their countries, and in uncontrolled regions it is particularly easy to evade the rule of law. Violent NSAs also flourish under conditions of poverty and limited economic prospects, when people can be easily tempted by the potential for wealth or revenge against groups they believe have wronged them. Transnational organized crime groups operate in almost every region of the world, and transnational organized crime, TOC, threatens international peace and security. 91. Some groups have stable and definable memberships, others are more loosely organized. The Sicilian Mafia and various transnational street gangs are among the most prominent TOC syndicates. 92. TOCs engage in a variety of illicit activities, including smuggling, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, wildlife or artifacts trade, intellectual property theft, counterfeiting, cybercrimes, and money laundering to fulfill their purpose. To make money, TOC syndicates rarely engage in only one illicit activity. International drug trafficking is the second largest source of TOC revenue, second only to counterfeiting and drug trafficking organizations, many of which are affiliated with terrorist groups, are among the highest profile TOCs. 93. Video: How Somalia's pirates make money. Poverty is a main cause of international crime, including piracy. This video explains how pirates make money in one of the poorest countries on earth, Somalia. TOC activities contribute to government corruption. In weak states, TOC groups bribe or ally with government officials, jeopardizing economic development, undermining the rule of law, and threatening government stability. As the 2018 World Atlas of Global Issues puts it, corruption, trafficking, poverty, conflicts, and terrorism all sustain and reinforce one another. 94. Globally, TOCs test international law, make the expansion of democracy more challenging, and siphon money away from governments and people. Transnational organized crime represents a global governance problem that cannot be satisfactorily addressed by one government alone. Criminals are typically headquartered in one country, but their crimes cross state borders and break both domestic and international laws. Because TOC groups encourage and depend upon government and law enforcement corruption, and because they tend to flourish in states that lack strong domestic criminal justice organizations that could investigate and prosecute them, a coordinated international effort is needed to fight this type of crime. Domestic criminal justice organizations such as the FBI in the United States coordinate with comparable organizations in other states and with crime-fighting IGOs like the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime to stem the activities of TOC organizations. Video: Neil Walsh, UN expert on cybercrime. In this video, Neil Walsh, chief of the UN cybercrime team, talks about the role of the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime in battling international cybercrime. Terrorist organizations. Terrorism is the use or threat of violence by non-state actors to influence citizens or governments in the pursuit of political or social change. In the wake of the September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States, terrorism became a global security concern. Globalization and advances in technology have allowed terrorist organizations to access funding and recruits from far beyond the organization's headquarters and to spread their message via social media. In an article published only weeks before the 9/11 attacks, Paul Pillar of the Brookings Institute said, "In today's globalizing world, terrorists can reach their targets more easily, their targets are exposed in more places, and news and ideas that inflame people to resort to terrorism spread more widely and rapidly than in the past." 95. Like most other transnational issues, terrorism is a threat to all states, and it is impossible to envision a single-state solution. Terrorists are motivated by some combination of nationalism, ideology, and religion. Islamist terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, ISIS or ISIL, and Boko Haram have been responsible for the deadliest terrorist acts in the 21st century. 96. Like other religious extremist groups, Islamist terrorists want to impose their version of their religion on all spheres of life, including the political state. The desire for national independence in places like Palestine and Northern Ireland, as well as extremist ideological beliefs such as white nationalism or neo-Nazism, can also motivate terrorist attacks. International cooperation is crucial to monitor and prevent terrorist activities. Following 9/11, the UN Security Council formed the Counterterrorism Committee, which coordinates international counterterrorism measures. 97. In 2006, the General Assembly called on member states to focus on the underlying factors that contribute to terrorism, including weak institutions, ongoing conflict, and human rights violations. Most regional IGOs have counterterrorism programs. Interpol, the International Criminal Police Organization, is an IGO that coordinates the efforts of the police in countries around the world. NGOs contribute to counterterrorism activities as well. IGOs and NGOs work in tandem to help states implement global counterterrorism strategies.